What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and in this video we're going to be going over one of the last decks I've yet to cover in fiber format, and that's Spirits. Now, I was initially planning on making this video, maybe in a week or 2 weeks, because I thought that there would just be more decks in fiber that I wanted to cover. But when going through the remaining ones I had left to do, I realized there actually isn't that many new strategies left that I haven't actually featured on the channel. And if there are any strategies that you want me to cover in fiber format, definitely let me know down in the comments below. But after the Spirit deck, I think there's only dragons, and then I think that's it for the new strategies. Although I could definitely be forgetting. So again, let me know down in the comments if I am. But spirits are a very interesting sort of new type of monster that was released in Legacy of Darkness, and it does have some merit to sort of this strategy. There's some very interesting things that spirits can do uniquely compared to other monsters. So if you don't know, spirits basically all can't be special summoned, and then during the end phase of the turn that they're normal summoned or flip face up, they're returned to the hand. So this can be a bit bad, as it does leave you open to your opponent's attacks, but it can also be tough for your opponent to actually get rid of these spirit monsters, as there's a lot less ways to interact with cards in hand than there are to remove them on field. So I think that this is a neat sort of strategy, and they also do have some individually powerful cards. For instance, Yata Garasu, which is a meta-defining spirit monster that actually can lock your opponent out of the game if you get them to low enough resources here. Now, if we're looking at playable spirits total, there actually aren't that many overall. If you'll notice, I did a sort of search here for spirit monsters based on release date. And I know I'm blocking some of the spirit monsters on this list here, unfortunately. But there are only 10 at this point in the game's history, and not all of them are worth playing. So, I went over all of these in my guide to fiber format. But yeah, there really aren't too many good ones. I mean, there are some powerful tribute monsters in the form of Yamada Dragon and Hino Kagutsuchi, but these are very, very hard to get out. I will actually be featuring Yamada Dragon in my Dragons video, because I do think that it can be good for that deck in particular. So don't worry if you wanted to see these multiple tribute spirit monsters in action. You will be able to hopefully get to see Yamada Dragon in a deck. But I do think that for the general spirit strategy, you're just not committing enough to board to be able to bring out Hino Kagutsuchi or Yamada Dragon easily enough. We are playing one copy of Ultimate Offering here. I'm kind of not sold on the card, but I figured I'd try it out here. And that can enable you to get out Hino Kagutsuchi or Yamada Dragon, but I don't know if that investment is worth it. So yeah, I chose not to include these. Other ones that I was considering using, you can potentially do a stall burn deck with Inaba White Rabbit. Just lock down your opponent's attacks with things like Gravity Bind or, Messenger of Peace. Summon out Inaba White Rabbit each turn, get in for 700 damage. I mean, that is something you can do. I'm not really sure it's worth doing. Especially given that a lot of burn decks, around this time, they play things like Chain Energy potentially, which, this pairs very poorly with, as you have to bring it out each turn, costing yourself 500 life points every time you bring it out. But that is a way that you could go with this deck. Also, Maharagi could be used to sort of increase consistency, because it basically allows you to look at the top card of your deck, and then either draw it or, return to the bottom of the deck during your next draw phase. So, there are some things that these monsters can do, but in my mind, the only spirits that are kind of worth running are Asura Priest, which can deal with recruiters very easily. For instance, if your opponent brings out something like Mystic Tomato, you can get through the Mystic Tomatoes with an Asura Priest and deprive them of resources that way. Although, if they bring out Mystic Tomato, they're likely ending in a Witch of the Black Forest or a Sangan, so it's not the best trade, but it is something here. Also, Scapegoat is played somewhat in this format in some decks, so this can be good to deal with that as well. And the other spirit monster that I think is worth talking about is Sousa Soldier. It's not the best because it can't really get too much damage in, as it halves all battle damage it inflicts to your opponent, but it can get over both Gemini Elf and Kaiku, so it can be tough for your opponent to deal with in that respect. Now, I don't think that this deck is by any means perfect. I think if we were trying to sort of improve this deck in the future, honestly, you could probably cut some of the Asura Priests to replace them with things like Kaikus or Gemini Elves instead, and just have Sousa Soldier as your one sort of spirit along with Yata. But that sort of goes against the spirit of the deck, if you will. So I don't really want to do that for this video, and so we're playing this deck that I think is somewhat janky and suboptimal, but I do think it's interesting to talk about. So let's talk about it. So, of course, I already mentioned the Spirit Monster. We're playing a Surprise, Sousa Soldier, and Yata Garasu. But for the other monsters, we're kind of monster light. And I do think this is fine as, again, as I said, it's a lot tougher for your opponent to deal with your monsters than it would be in a normal deck. So I think it's fine to sort of slim down on the other monsters you've got here. We've got 3 Mystic Tomato along with a Witch and a Sangan here. I feel like the Mystic Tomatoes are good at keeping board presence, which this deck often does lack. So I do think that they're good for that reason. We've also got an Exiled Force to search off the Witch or Sangan, a Fiber Jar to search off the Witch or Sangan. Fiber Jar is really like the only way you can actually recycle your spirit monsters, as they can't be brought back from grave. And we've also got an Injection Fairy Lily, which is just here to sort of close out the game, get in a lot of damage. I think, honestly, I might cut this in the future, as you are going to be low on life points in most cases, and Lily is a bit worse in those scenarios. But it's okay, and it did sort of come up in the games that I played here. For this build, we've got Change of Heart, Confiscation, Dark Hole, Graceful Charity ×2, Harpy, Feather Duster, Monster Reborn, MST ×3, Arfings to the Doomed, because the way I see it, you're likely going to have monsters in hand, so you don't really care about fading a draw step as long as you can deprive your opponent of monsters and potentially get in with something like Yata or your other spirits. We've also got a Painful Choice. This card's a bit worse in this deck, as, if you send the spirits, you can't get them back, really. But it's still good for deck thinning, and so that's why it's in here. We've also got a Pot of Greed, a Raigeki, a Celestial, and a Forceful Sentry. Now, you may notice that Delinquent Duo is not in the main deck, and that was actually a mistake that I made. I should have had it in the main deck here, but, it slipped my mind, and so I had it in the side deck instead. It is very good in this sort of deck, as you do really need to deprive your opponent of resources. And also, if you can get them down to a low enough point that you can actually Yata lock them, it's very good. So I do think that Delinquent Duo does belong in this deck. That was just a deck building error on my part, and it does come up in the video. So I figured I'd preserve it like this, just so you can see. I think that if I was making a change here, I'd probably bring in Duo for the Injection Fairy Lily and do that. But I did have Injection Fairy Lily in my deck for the first game, so it's just something to keep in mind. And for the traps, we've got Imperial Order, Mirror Force, Torrential Tribute, which is really good in this deck, given that you're likely not going to have many monsters on board, so this will be like a one-sided board wipe. And lastly, the One Ultimate Offering. I do think that I sided this out after game 1 in favor of a Scapegoat instead. But, it's in here to experiment with. That's why we're testing out these decks, to experiment with them. Now, I don't think that this deck is a meta contender by any means, but it was pretty fun in the game that I did play with it. So let's dive into those now, and let's see how it did. Okay, we've got a game against PJ Darkness, a frequent guest on the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on. We're playing the Spirit deck, and we luckily do win the Rock, Paper, Scissors here, so we will be able to go first. And let's see how this goes for us. It's kind of awkward with the Spirit deck going first, that you can't really commit something to board in most cases. And it looks like that may be the case here as well with these Asura Priests. I mean, 1200 defense isn't bad, but most things in the format do get over it, so, like, it's not really worth setting. We're going to start off with a Forceful Sentry here, see what they're working with, and we see they've got Bazoo, Injection Fairly, Scapegoat, Graceful Charity, and Monster Reborn. And, oh, this is a bit of a tough hand. Injection Fairy Lily can be really bad for us, as, they can just get in for a ton of damage. But honestly, Graceful Charity is such a powerful card that might be the pick here. Just sending that back into the deck, preventing them from drawing new things and depriving us of hand knowledge. Because as long as we, know what they've got, we can play around it slightly. For instance, like this Offerings to the Doomed can be used to clear the Lily, although, the Bazoo can still get over our Asura Priest, so it's not the best in that way. We also do have a Painful Choice to potentially get things here to deal with this hand that we might need. So I do think that I do send back the Graceful Charity, and I do indeed, just to deprive any sort of hand ambiguity. We're going to go for a painful choice here. We're going to send a Confiscation, and this is when I realized that I didn't put the Duo in the deck, and that's really bad because I would have liked to have sent Confiscation and Duo, and then a bunch of other cards. But instead, we're just going to send 3 Tomatoes and a Sangan. So if I had the Duo in deck, I would likely would have sent the Confiscation, a Duo, and 3 Tomatoes, keeping the Sangan in deck. But as is, I sent these. And the reason I sent these is because they commit to board and make it less likely that they're going to just bring out Lily and attack in here. Also Sangan and Witch, if I get to that off Tomato, can search out Fiber Jar, which might be good to sort of bring out in this situation, as we are in a bit of a tough spot. So they're going to give us the Sangan here, and we're going to set the Sangan, set in offerings, and just pray that they don't have Nobleman of Crossout, as that would be really bad for us. They've got Pot of Greed, which is also really bad for us. So now they do have that hand ambiguity that I mentioned. They're going to fire a Forceful, take our Change of Heart. Kind of unfortunate there. That would have been pretty good for later if we did want to go for like an OTK. They're going to bring out Gemini Elf. So actually this is fine because now we know everything in their hand again. They're going to attack into our set. It's a Sangan. We misclick and banish the top card of our deck. And we grab a Fiber Jar here, as we kind of do want to like reset the game potentially. They're going to set one, pass back to us, and we draw Injection Fairy Lily, which... This is actually interesting. We could try and get in some damage here. I mean, we've got Injection Fairy Lily. We've got a Seraph Priest to deal with the Scapegoat, which I believe we do know is set. Yeah, I mean, it could be a Monster Reborn set, but it's very likely that they have a Scapegoat set. So what we could do is we can bring out Injection Fairy Lily now, attack over the Gemini Elf, then bring out a Seraph Priest next turn and hit over to Scapegoat to attack in with Injection Fairy Lily again. We've got Offerings to the Doom to potentially protect the Lily. So there's some stuff we could do here. So actually, I do think that I am going to go for the Lily play. I think in hindsight, this was actually a bit short-sighted because I've only got 4 Lily activations. So this will be one of them. If they reborn a monster and summon a monster here, that will kind of force 2 more. We do have offerings for that, but then we can't really like trade profitably with our life points that we're losing. And life points do matter a lot in this format. So it is a bigger consideration that you'd have to make in later formats. They're going to attack into the Lily here. I do offerings it just to get it off the field. And then main 2, I actually... Oh, I'm not going to do anything. Okay, that's interesting. Oh, wait, that was their turn. That's why I didn't do anything. Yeah, so we're going to think about this a bit. And we're actually not going to attack with the Lily because we do know about the Scapegoat. So there's not really much point in doing that now. I mean, I guess it could clear a goat token, so that's something. But we kind of want to keep the Lily here, so that way, like, oh, actually, no. Yeah, I should have just attacked with the Lily. If they activated Scapegoat, then not attacked into one of the tokens and just prevented them from actually bringing out 2 monsters here. That would have been the smart play. I should have done that. And then if they didn't fire Scapegoat, then we could just poke in for either 3,400, which would actually be pretty good, or we could also poke in for just a mere 400 as well. So there's a couple options that we could have done there. But yeah, I didn't think of them in the moment, and yeah, I made a very passive play. I don't necessarily think this was right. And now they're going to potentially have a chance to punish us for it with this Monster Reborn here. They're just going to attack in to our Lily with their Lily, pay 2,000. We're also going to pay 2,000 because otherwise we'd be taking 3,000. They're going to bring out a Kaiku and pass back to us. And I mean, we know it's Scapegoat, but might as well bait it out just in case. I mean, I don't know what it would be. I don't think that there was any possibility it wasn't Scapegoat, but you know, it doesn't really matter at this point. I guess we're revealing we're on an MST, so that's the reason not to do it. But they can assume that anyways, so I don't really think it mattered there. But we are going to Fiber Jar, just reset the board, and hopefully we'll be able to do something here. We've gotten them down to almost half their life points, so that's pretty good. And this hand is a pretty killer one. Wow, this is actually a really good hand here. Because we've got Yata, we can sort of draw lock them here and just hope that that's enough to win the game, because we do have Torrential Tribute to also, you know, clear whatever they bring out. And we've got Ultimate Offering as well to potentially bring out multiple monsters. And yeah, so we're going to set the Ultimate Offering here first. The reason for this is that if they've got like a Harpy's Feather Duster or something like that, we don't want to lose the Torrential Tribute, as that's very valuable for us. And if the Ultimate Offering does survive, we can also bring out an Exiled Force, clear whatever they bring out. And so I'm ultimately fine with this. yeah, it's a little bit risky, but they do have an MST, so I'm fine with this. They're going to set 2 and pass back to us. And we draw Imperial Order, which is pretty nice. We're just going to clear that set. And our reward for that is Magician of Faith. I kind of figured that it would be like a Magician of Faith or a Tomato or something, because if you've got Sangin or Witch, you don't really care about summoning it out onto an empty board and attacking in. So I feel like the Exiled Force there was pretty good, although they only really would have gotten back MST. We're going to set an Imperial Order and set a Torrential Tribute and pass back to them. And we can feel comfortable doing this, given that Imperial Order can shut down the Harpies Feather Dusters, and so I feel fine about that. We're going to go for Imperial Order on the Pot of Greed. They're going to set one and pass back to us, and I feel very good about this. We've got Confiscation, so we can also clear out that last card in hand. But we are in a bit of an awkward spot, because we have to keep paying for Imperial Order every turn, and if they do have some spell that can get them out of it, then that's really bad for us. But I do think we want to keep the Imperial Order up as long as possible, just so we can potentially draw more outs to whatever spells they might have. And we're just going to keep attacking in. And they will concede before this point, but it turns out that they don't actually have anything to stop this Yata. So ultimately, this is going to be fine. And yeah, the offerings is some insulation as well. So even if they did have something that could deal with this, like potentially a Monster Reborn or something like that, we've got offerings to stop it. We've got Torrential to stop it. So we will be winning this game here. So we're just going to pass back to them, and they know that the writing's on the wall. There's no point in drawing it out, so they're just going to concede. So we were able to win that game 1. I do think we got pretty lucky off of our Fiber Jar recycle. But I do think that, we were able to get in some damage early, which did actually contribute to us being able to win that game as well. So going into game 2, I side out the Lily for a Delinquent Duo. I think I also side out the Ultimate Offering in game 2. I definitely have sided out in game 3, but I replaced it with a Scapegoat. I think the MST in the previous game, really shows the flaw in Ultimate Offering, in that MST is everywhere this format. And so you can easily lose out on your Ultimate Offerings, and that can be really bad, especially if you're paying 500 life points already. Although if you do that, then, you can always chain Ultimate Offering to the MST to still bring out your monster, but it's more life points, so yeah. And if they activate MST, like when you first activate Ultimate Offering, you can't chain it because of the way Continuous Traps work in this format at this time. So yeah, I don't really like it that much in this deck, so I will be swapping it out for the Scapegoat here. Whether in this game or the next game, I don't quite remember, but I don't think Ultimate Offering comes up this game. I could be wrong, though. This opener is kind of interesting. I think it's pretty good, all things considered. The offerings can, shut off my draws, sure, but, Tomato and Susa Soldier are pretty good to have in hand. So I'm ultimately fine, but, Confiscation will complicate things a bit. Yeah, losing the Tomato is kind of rough here. They're going to just set one and pass back to us. That means they likely have something to deal with Susa Soldier or, chainable to MST. We're going to fire the MST anyways, just in case they're, bluffing us. Also, we want them to think that we don't have any more MSTs left, because we did draw this MST for turn here. Main 2, we're just going to set an offerings, pass back to them. They're going to summon out Bazoo. And that can actually clear our Susa Soldier, or at least our Susa Soldier can't clear that. So we are going to offerings that, just get it out of here. And they're just going to set 2, pass back to us. We're going to bring out Susa Soldier that will get Trap Hold. We're going to set this MST and pass back to them. Now, I feel like they probably have the read that we've got an offering set, which is exactly what I want them to think. They're going to MST here, and it seems like they did have that read. We'll be able to MST their back row. It's a Call of the Haunted, and they don't have anything profitable to bring out off of that. So we feel very good about that trade there. They're going to Reborn back the Bazoo, though, which is kind of unfortunate. They'll be able to get in for a fair amount of damage here, 2,500 to be exact. And yeah, that's kind of rough. We'll drop down to 5,500. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Torrential Tribute, which is very nice here. We're going to set the Torrential Tribute and set the offerings, pass back to them. And let's hope they get greedy. They're going to go for a painful choice here. And they're going to think about exactly what to send. They're going to send 2 drop-offs, a Force of Sentry, a Duo, and one more card here. And they're going to send a Jar of Greed here. Now, this is a bit interesting for us. So I think actually the choice here is to give them Duo. And the reason for this is we've got no cards in hand right now. And any card that we do draw will probably bring out. Sure, if it's a Spirit, they'll be able to trade Duo with that, but they do have to pay 1,000 life points to do that. And it's just a 1-for-1 trade. I value that. I value that much more than, them being able to... I value that much more than being able to... I value them having that much more than I do... I want them to have that much more than I want them to just have drop off, which can clear away a potential power spell, or Jar of Greed that can get them another resource. I guess I could give them Forceful as well, but I want them to actually spend life points. So I think I will give them the duo here. And that will indeed go to their hand there. They are going to go for a Bazoo here, and they're going to banish 3 for, just 2 from the graveyard. That makes sense. They're keeping cards in grave. They're going to attack in for 22. We are just going to clear that with an Offerings. We don't get to draw this turn, but, we've got TT set, so we'll hopefully be able to deal with whatever monster they bring out. But they've got MST, so that we'll deal with that. Luckily, it seems like they don't have any follow-up, so we will be able to bring out this Bazoo here. Banish 3. This is a little bit risky, as if they've got something like Snatch Steal. Then they can take it. But I figure, like, given that we're on the Spirit deck, Snatch feels really bad against Spirits, so I feel like they might have sided that out, and I feel like we're in a pretty decent position if that's the case. Unfortunately, they didn't. They do have the Snatch Steal here. They'll be able to banish 3 more, puff the Bazoo up to 35 or 34, attack in for 34, drop us down to 21. We will be able to gain some life points here, which is pretty nice. But yeah, we're in a tough spot because whatever the Witch searches out, they can always duo, which is the downside to duo here. But still not the worst draw in the world. We can also grab something in hand that we... Oh, well, I mean, Change of Heart will close out the game here. So that will indeed be the end of the game. And I'm not really sure there was much we could have really done differently there. I think we actually played that one pretty well, but it just wasn't enough. And that will happen with this deck. I mean, this deck is pretty fragile. And... yeah, if your opponent is able to side well against it, then it can be pretty rough for you. So for game 3, we definitely side out the Ultimate Offering. Like, one of the reasons behind siding out the Ultimate Offering is remembering back to Games 2's, like, very simplified game state with, like, no cards in hand. Ultimate Offering would be terrible in that situation. So I really do want the Scapegoats in here instead. This opener is insane. We're going to go for a duo first. I know there's debate in this format, like, do you fire duo or do you fire confiscation first? I really do value firing the duo first, especially if your other card in hand is confiscation. Because, like, what are you going to do if you confi and see a serpent in hand? Are you then not going to activate the duo until you get, like, Forceful Sentry? No, you're probably going to want to fire the duo anyways, or else just like a dead card in hand. So, like, if you've got duo Comfy, like, the choice is definitely duo first and then Comfy. If you've got duo Forceful Sentry, then it's a bit more of a debate because you could just go for, the off chance that they have a serpent. But I think in general, it is better to activate the duo before the hand information cards. So we're now going to fire a confiscation, see what they've got in hand. We see they've got Offerings, Magician, and Pot of Greed. And I mean, we definitely take the Pot of Greed here. Not really a question. They do have Magician of Faith, so that we'll be able to potentially get back the Pot of Greed, but we do have Change of Heart to grab the Magician of Faith. So I feel ultimately pretty good about this. We're then gonna go for a Painful Choice to sort of get more ways to deal with that Magician of Faith. And so we send Dark Hole, Imperial Order, Monster Reborn, Force of Sentry, and Exiled Force. Monster Reborn can get back Exiled Force if they give us the Reborn. So I feel pretty good about the selection. They give us the Dark Hole here, which makes sense. And the IO doesn't directly deal with the Magician of Faith, but it does deal with that Pot of Greed that they'd be getting back. We're then going to set this Assure Priest, knowing that they don't have any way to deal with it, and we're going to pass back to them. They're going to set one, set another, pass back to us, and we're just going to MST that set. I mean, we figured it's an Offerings, but we might as well get it out of here. And if it wasn't an Offering, then that would confirm that their set is a Magician of Faith. As is, we're going to fire Change of Heart on it in case it's Magician of Faith. We don't necessarily want to fire Dark Hole here and lose our Assure Priest. So we're going to Change of Heart it. It's a Sinister Serpent, and we're actually going to think about whether we want to commit this tomato to board, and I actually choose not to. And the reason for this is I want to fire the Dark Hole on the Magician of Faith if they set that next turn, and we want to have tomato, like, remain on field or in hand here. So yeah, they're just going to set one, pass back to us. It might not be Magician of Faith, but I do think we just have to go for it here. And luckily for us, it is the Magician of Faith. We go to bring out Tomato, attack in for 1400, and then just pass back to them. I could have gone for a little bit more damage with a Assure Priest, but I do value having a monster on field as field presence here. And this will hopefully add up to more damage over time, as they do have Sinister Serpent, so we will need a way to clear that every turn. They're going to set 2 and pass back to us. We draw Graceful Charity, which is pretty good. We're going to go for that Graceful Charity, just see if we get anything to deal with their set. And we don't, but we do draw another Graceful. We could go for that Graceful now, but I feel like we might as well just attack in here because we don't really want to lose our Assure Priest or our Witch. So yeah, unfortunately, we do get a bit punished for this. It is Fiber Jar. Maybe we should have just gone for another Graceful, just to try and find some way to deal with that set. But we had the read. It was like Serpent. I mean, it was a reasonable read to make. And yeah, so I think this was ultimately fine. And we wanted to save Graceful for something better later. Maybe this was a mistake, though. Maybe we should have just fired it. We don't have any Serpents or anything in deck, so it's not like we were necessarily like waiting for a Serpent to activate it. So yeah, maybe this was a mistake. But, you know, only time will tell. And we'll have to see what we get here. This is honestly a pretty good opener off of the Fiber Jar. We get Imperial Order here, so we'll be able to set that into Mirror Force, pass back to our opponent. And they're going to start out with a Confiscation. We're going to chain that Imperial Order. Unfortunately, they do have an MST for that, so they'll be able to hit this Reborn out of our hand here. And they're going to fire an MST on our set. That's really unfortunate. We really wanted that Mirror Force to go through. But luckily, it doesn't look to be too bad for us here. We draw Graceful, which is really good here. We're going to start by firing this Graceful. Unfortunately, they do have an Imperial Order, but they are pretty low in life points. They likely won't be able to actually keep that on field for a while. They're going to grab a Confiscation back to hand. We're just going to set this Offerings here. I mean, I don't know if we necessarily needed to do this, but I guess we want to like force them to discard the Assure Priest if they are going to fire the Confi. Instead, they're going to fire Forceful, which I think makes sense. They're low life points. And yeah, this is very unfortunate. We don't have a monster now. We draw another Offerings, which isn't really useful, but if they Confi that out of our hand, then that's pretty good. They're just going to set one, pass back to us. We draw another card we can't really use to get aggressive right now. And this is where our low monster count is coming back to bite us here. They're going to go for a Graceful Charity here. That will likely unbrick them here, and that's a bit worrying for us. They're going to discard a Confi and an MST. They're going to bring out a Kaiku here, and they're going to attack in. I think we probably do just take this. We could Offerings it, but we can get over Kaiku if we get Sousa Soldier. So I'm not the most concerned about that. We've got Change of Heart, which is actually pretty good. We're going to Change of Heart, just drop them down 1800. Unfortunately, they do have Offerings to Doom for that, but honestly, that's a pretty good trade. That's like a 1-for-2 trade. They don't draw next turn, and so I feel very good about this. So they're going to fire Reborn, which is quite unfortunate here. They'll be able to get back that Kaiku, and they're going to attack in for 1800. We are just going to Offering this now, as we are running pretty low on life, and we don't necessarily want to lose the Change of Heart if we do get like a Fiber Jar. I mean, maybe that's not the best way to picture it, but they've got no cards in hand. So like, I'm okay with them potentially like fading a draw step. We've got Offerings to Doom if they do get a monster. But we don't actually set Offerings to Doom, which is kind of weird. Oh, wait, that was during their turn. That's why. They're going to draw one, pass back to us. We draw Raigeki, which does not help us here. But if they come in another monster board, then it will. So they're going to set two, pass back to us. We finally draw a monster in the form of Sousa Soldier. We're going to summon out that Sousa Soldier and just attack in. They do have a Mirror Force here. Maybe we should have just blind MST'd their set. But, you know, I mean, they could have set it in the other spot. So it's tough to really say. I think it's fine just to hold it. They've got a Witch of the Black Forest, which is really bad for us, as if we do clear that with the Raigeki, we'll get them another monster. So it's pretty bad. We do draw Confiscation, so I feel fine Raigeking this and then potentially confiscating their monster, but a Karibo I don't actually care that much about. It does buy them a turn, but if we are going for like a lethal push, we can always Confiscation out of their hand then, and I don't necessarily want to lose the 1,000 life points now, so we're actually just going to pass back to them. They're going to brand Injection Fairy Lily, which, I mean, we do have to Offerings this, as otherwise we lose the game. So we won't be drawing here. We'll pass back to them. They're going to bring out a Gemini Elf, which is pretty good here. And they're going to attack in for 1900. So we'll take that, drop down to 1200. They'll pass back to us. We draw Offerings, and, you know, we're going to set that and pass back to them. I think we honestly could have set Confiscation as a bluff, given that there's no way we're going to be using it now, or on the following turn even, because we know that they'll have Karibo in hand at all points, basically. And so there's no reason to, like, Confiscation their hand, drop down to 200, and then die to, like, a Karibo normal summon. So, yeah. They're just going to go to battle, attack in with the Gemini Elf. We've got this Offerings here. We just got to hope they don't have anything good here. We're going to set this Confiscation, pass back to them. Unfortunately, they've got a Serpent. I mean, that isn't death for us yet. We are still alive. But it is a bit of a worrying situation. We're down at 900. We physically can't use Confi. We draw Torrential Tribute. We'll set that, pass back to them. They're going to bring out an Fiber Jar here and attack. And I think we do have to torrential tribute that, as you know, we'll drop down to 100, and that's a very, very worrying range to be in. And yeah, so they'll pass back to us. We draw Scapegoat, which will buy us a bit more time, so I feel okay about that. They've got Sinister Serpent here. They're going to bring out an Exiled Force, and they're going to attack in directly here. We've got this Scapegoat, so we will be able to stay alive yet another turn. We're barely making it. And they're going to fire Raigeki now, which is, that really hurts here. We draw a Fiber Jar. We do have to set that. They are likely going to tribute off the Exiled Force to deal with the Fiber Jar here, but there's nothing else we can do. And they're going to tribute off that indeed, bring out a Gemini Elf, and that will indeed be the end of the game. So very intense ending to this game here. But I do think it does show some of the flaws with this deck. And to be fair, that could be my particular build of it. We are pretty monster light. So, you know, going through a period where we don't really see many of these monsters is definitely something that the deck can do. And maybe if you filled it with more monsters, that would change. But I also think if you filled it with more monsters, it kind of invalidates the existence of the spirit monsters in the deck, because you know, the spirit monster are just kind of worse versions of your other monsters, and you're just using these to sort of blank your opponent's removal cards that would otherwise be very powerful against you. So, I mean, I have very mixed feelings about this deck. I think it can do some neat things, as you saw in game 1, but I think overall it's not really worth playing, and it's probably rogue at best. But what do you all think of this deck? You know, do you think that I'm giving it a bad rap, and if you build it a bit differently, then it would actually be a lot better? Or do you think that, you know, this deck is actually much worse than I'm making it seem, and that the game 1 win was a complete fluke? Let me know down in the comments below. I look forward to chatting with you all as always. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.